Ever wondered what happens when the stadium lights go down, the makeup comes off, and the world's biggest superstars finally head back to their childhood bedrooms? We see them as flawless icons dominating global charts, but to 7 ordinary Korean mothers, they're just the same messy, stubborn, or surprisingly quiet boys who used to leave socks on the floor and raid the fridge at midnight. Today, we are pulling back the velvet curtain of K-pop royalty to deliver the ultimate, deeply intimate countdown based on real, heartwarming, and sometimes hilariously shocking confessions directly from the BTS matriarchs themselves. From unexpected midnight kitchen disasters to the heartbreakingly quiet ways they cope with immense pressure when the cameras stop rolling, these mothers are finally exposing their sons' true, raw colors. Which member is secretly a chaotic clean freak at home, and who reverts back to a helpless toddler the second he steps through his mother's front door? Most importantly, who took the crown as the absolute hardest worker behind closed doors, leaving even his own family in complete awe of his relentless drive? Get ready for an emotional, eye-opening ride packed with exclusive family lore and psychological insights that will completely change how you view your favorite idols. Let's dive straight into the countdown to uncover the real men behind the global phenomenon. Number 7. RM. The Broken Plates. The Genius Toddler. When you think of Kim Namjoon, known globally as RM, the image that immediately flashes into your mind is one of unparalleled authority, a towering intellect, and the charismatic leader who confidently addressed the United Nations not once, but multiple times, inspiring an entire generation with his profound words on self-love, identity, and youth empowerment. He is the steadfast pillar of BTS, the linguistic genius with a verified IQ of 148, who fluently translates complex, deeply layered human emotions into chart-topping, record-breaking hits, and effortlessly bridges the cultural and linguistic gap between the East and the West on the world's biggest stages. However, according to his mother's hilariously candid and deeply touching confessions, the absolute second this global icon crosses the threshold of his family home in Ilsan, shedding his designer suits for oversized, comfortable vintage clothes, that imposing, infallible leader persona instantly evaporates into thin air, entirely replaced by a slightly helpless, endearingly clumsy young man who essentially reverts to the practical survival skills of a giant, highly intellectual toddler. His mother reveals that the infamous God of Destruction nickname, a title affectionately bestowed upon him by his bandmates and millions of fans for his legendary, almost supernatural ability to accidentally break sunglasses, snap stage props in half, and essentially dismantle anything he lays his hands on, is absolutely not an exaggerated variety show gimmick created for laughs, but rather a highly chaotic daily reality that has kept his family in a constant state of loving exasperation and high alert for years. She laughingly but seriously exposes that she has an unspoken but strictly enforced rule within the walls of her house. Kim Namjoon is categorically banned from washing the dishes, especially her prized ceramic plates, and is absolutely forbidden from operating the gas stove, wielding sharp kitchen knives, or attempting any form of culinary experimentation without direct, uninterrupted maternal supervision. It's a fascinating juxtaposition that actually dives deep into the psychology of a savant-like genius. Neuroscientists and psychological experts often note that individuals possessing extraordinary cognitive abilities and hyperactive intellectual processing power frequently suffer from a noticeable lack of spatial awareness and basic fine motor coordination. simply because their highly active brains are constantly dedicating massive amounts of energy to processing complex philosophical concepts, analyzing classical art history, and conceptualizing intricate lyrical wordplay, leaving virtually no mental bandwidth or neurological RAM left to calculate the exact physical force needed to close a refrigerator door gently without snapping the plastic handle clean off. His mother shares incredibly vivid stories of finding him completely zoned out for hours on end, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, completely surrounded by towering mountains of heavy, esoteric art books, miniature bonsai trees, and scattered museum pamphlets, utterly and hopelessly oblivious to the bustling world around him, to the point where he will completely forget to eat his meals unless she physically walks over and places a plate of warm, lovingly home-cooked food directly in front of his face, gently reminding him that even artistic geniuses need basic human sustenance. But beneath these humorous, sitcom-like anecdotes of shattered drinking glasses and near-disastrous kitchen interventions lies a profoundly emotional, beautifully raw, and heartbreakingly real reality that brings genuine tears to his mother's eyes when she reflects upon it in quiet moments. She acutely understands the crushing, almost unimaginable and isolating weight her beloved son carries on his broad shoulders every single day of his life, as the leader and primary spokesperson for the biggest musical act on the entire planet, constantly serving as the unwavering shield, the eloquent translator, and the sturdy emotional anchor for his 6 bandmates amidst the relentless, unforgiving scrutiny of the global media, demanding fans, and the highly cutthroat international music industry. She remembers the early days, the tearful arguments when she vehemently opposed his underground rapping dreams, terrified for his future, and how he proved her wrong by conquering the globe, which makes her current observations even more poignant. Therefore, when Namjoon finally comes home, his mother realizes with a profound maternal instinct that his sudden clumsiness, his absent-mindedness, and his complete willing surrender of all daily responsibilities isn't just mere carelessness or laziness, it is his subconscious, desperate psychological need to completely let go of the heavy steering wheel of his life, to actively strip off the suffocating heavy armor of RM, the flawless leader, and simply be allowed to exist as Namjoon the son. He is a boy who deeply and desperately craves the comforting, grounding normalcy of his mother telling him what to do, playfully scolding him for leaving his expensive designer clothes thrown haphazardly on the bedroom floor, and taking over the burden of navigating his basic human needs. She watches him wandering around the house in his baggy sweatpants, carefully examining the delicate leaves of his beloved potted plants with the wide-eyed, innocent curiosity of a small child. And while she might let out a heavy sigh of exasperation when he accidentally knocks over a cup of water onto the carpet for the 3rd time that week, her motherly heart swells with an immense, protective, and overwhelming warmth, fully knowing that this slightly messy, beautifully imperfect and entirely ordinary sanctuary is the absolute only place in the entire world where the genius leader of BTS is permitted to be weak, vulnerable, flawed, and completely taken care of without facing the harsh judgment of millions of watching eyes, proving a beautiful life lesson that even the strongest, most unshakable pillars need a safe, quiet place to lean on and rest when the blinding stadium lights finally fade to black and the deafening cheers of the crowds are replaced by the quiet, comforting hum of home. Number 6. Jin, the midnight gamer, the silent caretaker. When the name Kim Sek-jin, universally recognized and unabashedly self-proclaimed as worldwide handsome, echoes across massive sold-out stadium venues from Wembley to SoFi, you instantly envision the legendary, perfectly executed flying kisses, the incredibly contagious windshield wiper laugh that possesses the magical ability to cure any bad day, and the overwhelming, radiant confidence of a superstar who seemingly owns the entire universe. Yet, when we dive deep into the incredibly intimate, emotionally raw confessions of his own mother, the reality unfolding behind the closed doors of his family home is so drastically different, so profoundly grounded, that it will completely shatter your perception of the group's beloved eldest member. To truly and deeply understand the complex psychology of Kim Sek-jin, you absolutely must rewind the clock back to his deeply touching, almost cinematic origin story, a heartbreakingly pure motivation that he once tearfully confessed during a massive global concert. He initially wanted to become a highly successful actor solely because, as a young boy, he would silently listen to his mother sitting quietly during social gatherings with her friends, utterly unable to brag about her own son, while the other mothers boasted relentlessly about their children's academic and professional achievements. He desperately wanted to become the ultimate China, the legendary mother's friend's son who excels at everything, just to put a proud smile on her face and give her a reason to hold her head high. Now that he has literally conquered the global music industry, shattered Billboard records, and achieved a level of wealth and fame that most humans cannot even begin to fathom, you would naturally expect him to parade around his childhood home like a conquering, triumphant king. However, his mother lovingly and emotionally exposes that the absolute second Sek-jin enters their house, the loud, boisterous, dad joke-cracking idol completely vanishes into thin air, entirely replaced by an incredibly quiet, remarkably introverted, and deeply thoughtful young man who desperately seeks silence, solitude, and restorative peace. She reveals a fascinating, almost paradoxical psychological contrast. While he acts as the dependable, energetic, mood-making eldest brother to the 6 BTS members, often purposely acting silly, shedding his ego, and willingly ruining his own immaculate, handsome image just to break the suffocating tension and relieve the crushing pressure on his younger bandmates, at home he is actually the maknae, the youngest son of the family, and surprisingly, he exhibits the most mature, heavily reserved demeanor among everyone present. One of the most relatable yet deeply eye-opening habits his mother shares is his absolute unwavering dedication to his solitary midnight gaming sessions. Long after the rest of the household is gone to sleep and the bustling city outside has quieted down, she will often wake up to find the soft, glowing blue light of a computer screen emanating from his room in the dead of the night. Sek-jin, the multi-millionaire global icon who regularly rubs shoulders with Hollywood elites, will be sitting there in his most worn-out, faded, comfortable pajamas, completely engrossed in playing classic old-school MMORPGs like MapleStory for agonizingly long hours on end. Psychologists and behavioral experts often explain that for individuals who exist under the relentless, blinding, and highly critical spotlight of massive global fame, engaging in seemingly mundane, repetitive, and deeply nostalgic virtual worlds is not just a hobby, but a profound, desperately needed coping mechanism, a psychological escape hatch to maintain their sanity. In these digital, pixelated realms, he isn't BTS Jin, the man whose flawless face is plastered on towering billboards in Times Square, or who causes massive internet outages with a single selfie. He is just another anonymous, everyday player quietly grinding for digital items, finding immense, immeasurable comfort in the predictable, low-stakes, easily controllable environment of a video game, where he can finally dictate the narrative without the entire world scrutinizing, judging, and analyzing his every single move. His mother also shares incredibly beautiful, poignant observations about his relationship with food and family time at home. The entire fandom knows and thoroughly loves the chaotic, loud energy of his legendary Eat Jin broadcasts, where he dramatically stuffs massive, impossible bites of steak into his mouth while passionately and hilariously debating nonsensical topics with his members. But at his mother's dining table, the reality is heart-wrenchingly quiet and incredibly tender. She intimately notes that he eats slowly, silently, and mindfully savoring every single bite of her warm, home-cooked stews with a profound, almost spiritual sense of gratitude, rarely speaking unless directly spoken to. He doesn't want to perform, he doesn't want to be the center of attention, he just deeply wants to be nurtured, to feel the unconditional warmth of a mother's cooking that no Michelin-starred restaurant in the world can replicate. Furthermore, she exposes his absolute stubborn refusal to bring the immense, crushing burdens of his extraordinary career into their peaceful home. She possesses the keen, inescapable intuition of a mother. She can clearly see the dark, heavy circles under his eyes, the deep physical exhaustion radiating from his broad shoulders after enduring brutal, grueling, months-long tour schedules, and she can plainly hear the slight, painful rasp in his voice when he has pushed his vocal cords to their absolute breaking limits in the recording studio. Yet he will never, ever utter a single word of complaint or show a hint of struggle. If she gently touches his arm and asks him if he's tired or hurting, he will simply flash her a small, warm, incredibly reassuring smile, make a gentle, understated joke to quickly deflect her maternal concern, and vehemently insist that everything is perfectly fine and she has absolutely nothing to worry about. This stoic, silent endurance breaks her heart in the most beautiful, devastating way possible, because she suddenly realizes that the ambitious young boy who once desperately wanted to succeed just so she could brag to her neighborhood friends is now actively suppressing his own pain, stress, and extreme exhaustion purely to protect her from experiencing even a single second of anxiety. He fiercely guards his family's peace of mind with the exact same unyielding, selfless dedication that he uses to protect his younger bandmates from the harsh realities of the idol industry. It is this profound, staggering duality, the loud, confident, brilliantly shining superstar who deliberately and lovingly shrinks himself down into a quiet, obedient, and incredibly empathetic son the moment he steps through the front door, that makes Kim Sek-jin's true nature so incredibly compelling, deeply inspiring, and overwhelmingly beautiful. His mother's heartfelt stories peel back the thick, protective layers of his comedic genius to reveal a man of immense, staggering emotional intelligence, a silent caretaker who masterfully uses laughter and humor as an impenetrable shield for others in public, but strictly uses his own quiet, unwavering resilience as a shield for his family in private, proving without a shadow of a doubt that sometimes the absolute loudest, most vibrant voices in the room actually belong to the most deeply reflective, incredibly tender, and fiercely protective souls when the heavy velvet curtains fall and the cameras finally stop rolling. Number 5. Suga, the savage rapper, the secretly gentle son. When the name Min Yoongi, also universally feared and revered as the razor-sharp August D, and BTS's genius resident producer Suga is brought up in conversation, the immediate mental picture is that of a fiercely independent, brutally honest, and deeply introverted artist who spits lyrical fire, effortlessly annihilates internet trolls with a single savage sentence, and famously declared on national television that his ultimate life goal is to be reincarnated as a motionless rock. He is the undisputed musical backbone of the group, a relentless workaholic who practically lives inside the dark, isolated confines of his recording studio, producing chart-topping masterpieces while projecting an incredibly thick, impenetrable aura of icy indifference that makes even veteran industry professionals slightly intimidated to approach him. However, when his mother decides to bravely peel back the heavy layers of his notoriously tough, untouchable hip-hop persona, the staggering, emotionally overwhelming reality she exposes about his true habits at home will leave you absolutely speechless and profoundly moved. To truly grasp the unbelievable psychological contrast of Min Yoongi, we have to journey back to the painful, tear-soaked roots of his deeply complicated family history, a deeply agonizing origin story where his parents, driven by a desperate, protective fear for their son's financial survival in a notoriously ruthless industry, vehemently opposed his musical dreams, famously going so far as to tear up his precious lyric sheets and firmly demanding he focus on a stable, conventional career path. This agonizing lack of early support created a massive, unspoken chasm of pain that culminated in that legendary, heart-stopping moment during BTS's 2016 epilogue concert, where Yoongi, upon finally spotting his parents in the massive crowd, completely broke down, dropping to his knees on the cold stage floor, sobbing uncontrollably as he delivered a deeply traditional, agonizingly raw bow of forgiveness, gratitude, and overwhelming relief. Today, his mother tearfully and beautifully confesses that the absolute moment this hardened global superstar crosses the threshold of their family home, that intimidating, savage rapper vanishes without a single trace, entirely replaced by the most incredibly gentle, surprisingly affectionate, and deeply attentive son imaginable, completely shattering the widespread public misconception that he is cold and unapproachable. She hilariously exposes a secret that absolutely destroys his tough guy image. The fierce tongue technology-wielding August D is utterly and completely defenseless against their small, fluffy, brown toy poodle, Min Holly. His mother laughs until her sides hurt when she describes walking into the living room only to find her multi-millionaire, billboard-conquering son lying flat on his stomach on the carpet, completely shedding his cool ego to passionately baby talk to a tiny dog, showering the pet with endless kisses and high-pitched praises that his fans would absolutely pay millions to witness. But beyond the comical, heartwarming pet interactions, his mother reveals a deeply touching, remarkably profound psychological truth about how Yoongi actively chooses to love his family. He is the ultimate textbook definition of a tsundere, someone who appears outwardly cold but is secretly overflowing with intense, undeniable warmth and quiet devotion. He is not the type of son who will loudly declare his affection or write cheesy, sentimental letters. Instead, his mother explains, his love is deeply practical, silent, and incredibly observant. She will often wake up to randomly find highly expensive, top-tier health supplements, luxury massage chairs, or premium organic groceries magically appearing on her kitchen counter, completely unannounced and without a single word of boasting from her son, because he prefers his actions to speak entirely for him, silently making up for the days he couldn't afford a single bowl of black bean noodles while hustling as an underground producer in Daegu. Furthermore, whenever he visits, he quietly takes on the role of the household handyman. Without ever being asked, he will silently go around fixing broken light fixtures, tightening loose cabinet hinges, and meticulously organizing the family's electronics, pouring his genius-level attention to detail into humble, everyday acts of service just to make his parents' daily lives a fraction easier. Even more surprisingly, while the world views him as the incredibly quiet, lethargic member who uses sleep as his primary defense mechanism during chaotic group interviews, his mother lovingly exposes that within the safe, intensely private walls of their home, Yoongi is actually an incredibly engaged, remarkably talkative conversationalist who genuinely loves sitting at the dining table with his parents for hours, sipping hot tea and patiently explaining the intricate, complex details of his day, his upcoming musical project, and his deepest philosophical thoughts about life, completely shedding the heavy, exhausting armor he is forced to wear in front of the relentless media. Psychologists deeply understand this phenomenon. For an artist like Yoongi, who absorbs the dark, heavy energies of the world and channels his own past traumas, depression, and social anxieties into raw, intensely vulnerable music to heal millions of fans, the outside world is an incredibly draining, overstimulating battlefield that constantly demands his energy and emotional output. Therefore, his childhood home isn't just a place to rest his head, it is his ultimate, sacred psychological sanctuary, the only place on earth where he doesn't have to be a genius producer, a fierce rapper, or an unbothered idol, but where he is finally allowed to just be a soft, caring, and slightly awkward son who just wants to make sure his parents are eating well, sleeping comfortably, and living without a single ounce of worry. His mother's deeply emotional reflections paint an extraordinarily beautiful masterpiece of a young man who took the immense, agonizing pain of his misunderstood youth and, instead of holding on to bitter resentment, actively transformed it into a silent, fierce, and unbreakable protective love for his family, proving that beneath the intimidating, savage exterior of the world's coolest rapper beats the absolute softest, most tender, and deeply forgiving heart imaginable, a reality that makes us respect and adore Min Yoongi on a level that surpasses any musical achievement he could ever possibly unlock in his lifetime. Number 4. J-Hope, the Sunshine Mask, the secretly exhausted perfectionist. When the name Jungkook, universally adored and celebrated as BTS's resident sunshine, main dancer, and eternally optimistic mood maker J-Hope is mentioned, the immediate image that violently bursts into your mind is a blindingly bright, incredibly loud, and relentlessly energetic performer who effortlessly lights up entire stadiums with his dazzling, heart-shaped smile and unparalleled gravity-defying street dance skills. He is the Golden Hyung, the flawless performance leader who tirelessly pushes his members to perfection in the practice room, while simultaneously serving as their ultimate emotional cheerleader, constantly shouting his iconic, universally recognized catchphrase, "I'm your hope, you're my hope, I'm J-Hope," to millions of adoring fans across the globe, establishing himself as a beacon of relentless positivity in an often dark world. However, when his mother bravely steps forward to unveil the heavily guarded, intensely private reality of what actually happens the moment this human battery of joy returns to his hometown of Gwangju, the staggering, almost unbelievable contrast she paints will completely break your heart and force you to view his legendary sunshine persona in an entirely new, profoundly deeply moving light. Can you even begin to imagine what happens to a man who gives away absolutely every single drop of his light, warmth, and energy to the entire world once the cameras finally stop rolling and the deafening cheers fade into complete silence? His mother emotionally and tearfully confesses that the second Hoseok crosses the threshold of their family home, shedding his elaborate stage costumes for simple, comfortable loungewear, the loud, bubbly, relentlessly upbeat idol completely vanishes into thin air, instantly replaced by an unbelievably quiet, profoundly exhausted, and deeply serious young man who barely speaks above a soft whisper and completely drains himself into the living room couch like a deactivated, entirely depleted robot. She reveals a fascinating, deeply poignant psychological truth about her son that the public rarely gets to witness. The J-Hope persona is not an effortless, naturally occurring state of being, but rather an incredibly intense, physically and emotionally demanding conscious choice that requires an immense, almost superhuman amount of stamina and unwavering dedication to maintain day after day, meaning that when he finally comes home, his internal battery is completely, utterly, and devastatingly at 0%. She vividly describes heartbreaking, intimately quiet moments where she will lovingly prepare his absolute favorite childhood dishes, eagerly waiting to see that famous radiant smile light up the dining room, only to find him quietly and slowly eating his meal in complete, uninterrupted silence, his eyes heavy with the staggering, unimaginable exhaustion of carrying the emotional weight of his 6 bandmates and millions of fans on his slender shoulders for months on end during grueling world tours. Psychologists and behavioral experts frequently observe this specific fascinating phenomenon in highly empathetic, naturally extroverted performers and professional entertainers. They operate as massive emotional sponges and radiant suns for everyone around them, eagerly absorbing negativity and projecting immense joy. But this relentless emotional output leaves them incredibly vulnerable to severe internal depletion, meaning they absolutely require environments of absolute stillness, silence, and extremely low sensory stimulation to psychologically recover and literally recharge their utterly depleted souls. But the jaw-dropping surprises regarding Hoseok's secret home life absolutely do not stop at his sudden, jarring silence. His mother hilariously and affectionately exposes a deeply ingrained, almost obsessive behavioral trait that acts as his ultimate personal grounding mechanism. He is an absolute, uncompromising, and ruthlessly meticulous clean freak and organizational perfectionist who completely takes over the household the moment he arrives. While he might completely lack the energy to loudly joke around with his family or engage in lengthy, animated conversations, he somehow magically summons the physical strength to silently and intensely audit the entire household's cleanliness, rigorously folding stray laundry into mathematically perfect squares, meticulously color-coordinating the refrigerator contents by expiration date and category, and genuinely scolding his own parents if they fail to properly separate the recycling materials according to his extremely strict, high-standard environmental guidelines. His mother laughs out loud as she recalls how the powerful global superstar, who regularly performs in front of screaming sold-out arenas and commands the world's biggest stages with unmatched charisma, will suddenly turn into a strict, nagging household manager, pacing around the living room with a critical eye to ensure every single pair of shoes in the front entryway is perfectly aligned at a precise 90-degree angle before he can finally relax his shoulders and let his guard down. This intense need for order, cleanliness, and structural perfection is deeply fascinating from a clinical psychological perspective. When a person's external life is entirely dictated by chaotic, unpredictable international flight schedules, manic media interviews, sudden schedule changes, and the suffocating, intense pressure of global fame, where they have very little actual control over their own daily time, establishing absolute, flawless control over their immediate physical environment becomes a crucial, desperate coping mechanism to maintain their mental sanity and find a desperately needed sense of predictable, structured safety. Yet beneath these highly comical and deeply relatable stories of his strict recycling lectures and his silent, couch-bound exhaustion, his mother harbors a profound, overwhelmingly beautiful maternal pride that frequently brings her to genuine tears. She acutely understands that her beloved son deliberately and sacrificially burns himself out, voluntarily giving the absolute best, most radiant, and most energetic version of his soul to the world, solely because he firmly believes it is his life's ultimate calling and mission to bring hope, light, and happiness to those who are suffering in the darkness. She profoundly realizes that the public only sees the flawless execution of his intricate dance routines and the bright laughter that echoes across stadium speakers, entirely oblivious to the silent physical toll it takes on his joints, his muscles, and his mind, making his quiet quiet refuge at home all the more sacred and essential for his continued survival in the grueling entertainment industry. When she gently places a warm blanket over his sleeping form on the couch after he has finally finished organizing the entire kitchen to his exact, uncompromising standards, she feels a profound wave of respect wash over her, realizing that the young boy from Gwangju who simply loved to dance has transformed into a globally recognized pillar of strength who uses his own exhausting perfectionism not as a tool for vanity, but as a dedicated shield to protect his peace and ensure he can wake up the next day, put the dazzling sunshine mask back on, and continue saving the world one radiant smile at a time, leaving us completely awestruck by the staggering depth of his character and the quiet, hidden battles he fights completely alone behind closed doors. Number 3. Jimin, the brutal perfectionist, the floor-sleeping fairy. When the name Park Jimin, universally celebrated as the mesmerizing, gravity-defying contemporary dance prodigy and the angelic, high-register lead vocalist of BTS, is spoken, the immediate mental image that violently captivates the mind is one of breathtaking, unearthly elegance, an incredibly seductive stage presence that can effortlessly command mass resident fairy. He is the ultimate, flawless performer, a man who gracefully executes the excruciatingly difficult choreography of Black Swan with the haunting, delicate precision of a seasoned principal ballet dancer, while simultaneously radiating an overwhelming, blindingly bright warmth and deep empathy that instantly melts the hearts of millions of fiercely loyal fans across the entire globe, establishing himself as an ethereal, untouchable icon of modern pop culture. However, when his mother bravely decides to completely shatter this shimmering, carefully curated illusion and pull back the heavy velvet curtain to expose the intensely private, shockingly raw reality of what happens the absolute second this global phenomenon returns to his humble hometown of Busan, the heartbreaking, deeply emotional truth she reveals will leave you entirely speechless and fundamentally change the way you view his legendary angelic persona forever. To profoundly understand the staggering psychological complexity of Park Jimin, you must actively rewind to his notoriously brutal, deeply agonizing pre-debut days, a period characterized by such extreme, cutthroat uncertainty that he was famously almost kicked out of the final BTS lineup a staggering 8 separate times, a deeply traumatizing experience that permanently etched a relentless, haunting sense of inadequacy and a terrifying fear of failure into his very neurological wiring. Today, despite having literally conquered the absolute pinnacle of the international music industry, shattered countless Billboard records, and achieved a level of legendary fame that most artists can only dream of, his mother tearfully and emotionally confesses that the moment Jimin steps through the front door of their family home, he completely strips away the confident, mesmerizing superstar persona and instantly reverts to a highly anxious, relentlessly self-critical, and shockingly humble young man who flat-out refuses to acknowledge his own monumental success. She exposes a deeply fascinating, surprisingly grounded habit that completely defies his unimaginable wealth and global status. Despite having the financial means to purchase the most lavish, technologically advanced, and absurdly expensive luxury mattresses in the world, Jimin absolutely insists on dragging a thin, heavily worn-out traditional Korean blanket onto the hard wooden floor of the living room, stubbornly refusing to sleep in a proper bed whenever he visits his childhood home. His mother hilariously but sorrowfully recalls her endless, exasperated attempts to force him to sleep comfortably, only for him to gently but firmly argue that the cold, unforgiving hardness of the wooden floor is the absolute only thing that truly grounds him, keeping him physically connected to his humble, incredibly difficult roots and preventing him from ever becoming arrogant, complacent, or completely losing touch with the brutal, grueling reality of his past struggles. But beneath this quirky, highly unusual sleeping habit lies a profoundly dark, deeply agonizing psychological truth that brings genuine, heavy tears to his mother's eyes when she reflects upon his time at home. His absolute, terrifying inability to turn off his brutal inner critic. While the entire world universally praises him as a flawless, once-in-a-generation performer, his mother intimately reveals that she will often wake up in the dead of the night to find him sitting completely alone in the pitch-black living room, illuminated only by the harsh blue glare of his tablet screen, obsessively, meticulously, and painfully re-watching his own concert fan cams and stage performances for agonizing hours on end, entirely bypassing the thousands of brilliant, flawless moments to heavily fixate on a single, microsecond voice crack, a slightly misaligned dance step, or a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw that literally no one else in the entire stadium even noticed. Clinical psychologists and performance experts deeply recognize this exact, incredibly exhausting phenomenon as a severe, hyperactive form of imposter syndrome paired with chronic, uncompromising perfectionism. For Jimin, whose entire self-worth was initially built on the terrifying knife-edge threat of being deemed not good enough by his agency, his extraordinary, record-breaking success does not actually bring him a profound sense of peace or security, but rather drastically amplifies his overwhelming, crushing fear of deeply disappointing the millions of people who fiercely believe in him, driving him to brutally punish himself with impossible, inhuman standards, even when he is completely off the clock. His mother describes these deeply vulnerable, incredibly quiet midnight moments with a breaking heart, noting how she will gently sit beside him on the cold floor, softly placing her warm hand over the tablet screen to physically force him to stop dissecting his own perceived failures, desperately looking him in the eyes and repeatedly, lovingly affirming that he is absolutely enough, exactly as he is, without the flawless vocals or the breathtaking dance moves. She exposes that beneath the glamorous designer clothes and the blinding camera flashes, Jimin is essentially a deeply sensitive, incredibly fragile soul who drastically overthinks every single interaction, constantly worrying if he was kind enough to a staff member, if he smiled warmly enough at a fan, or if he is truly deserving of the massive, ocean-like love he receives daily, carrying an immense, suffocating emotional burden that he fiercely hides behind his dazzling crescent moon eye smile in public. Furthermore, his mother intimately shares that his absolute favorite, deeply cherished activity at home involves completely vanishing into the background, stripping away all of his superstar glamour to simply sit quietly at the kitchen island, meticulously peeling apples for his family, entirely captivated by the mundane, profoundly ordinary conversations about neighborhood gossip, his younger brother's daily life, and the simple, quiet routine of his parents, actively seeking out the most intensely normal, uneventful experiences possible to desperately wash away the overwhelming, chaotic sensory overload of his massive global fame. When she lovingly prepares his favorite, incredibly rich and comforting childhood stews, she acutely notices the profound, silent gratitude in his eyes, realizing that for a man who famously pushed his physical body to the absolute breaking point with extreme, highly dangerous starvation diets in the past, just to fit into a merciless industry's visual standards, eating a warm, lovingly made meal at home without a single ounce sense of guilt, judgment, or caloric restriction, is not just a dinner, but a profound healing act of pure survival and deeply needed psychological recovery. His mother's deeply emotional, incredibly brave confessions completely rip the veil off the glamorous, heavily sanitized idol industry, revealing the immense, staggering human cost of achieving global perfection and leaving fans completely awestruck by the sheer, unwavering strength of a young man who continuously battles his own internal shadows with relentless grace. It is this staggering, breathtakingly beautiful duality, the mesmerizing, untouchable god of the stage, who actively chooses to sleep on a hard wooden floor and obsessively critiques his own flawless performances in the dark, that makes Park Jimin's true nature so incredibly compelling, deeply inspiring, and overwhelmingly heartbreaking, proving without a shadow of a doubt that his true, undeniable superpower isn't just his heavenly voice or his mesmerizing dance moves, but his incredibly raw, vulnerable, and profoundly beautiful human heart that beats with an unyielding, fierce devotion to his craft and his family, cementing his legacy not just as a global superstar, but as an eternally humble, fiercely resilient son who will always, without fail, find his truest, safest self on the simple, grounding wooden floor of his childhood home in Busan. Number 2. V. The high-fashion muse, the affectionate farm boy. When the name Kim Tae-young, universally adored and instantly recognized across the globe as the enigmatic, baritone-voiced visual masterpiece V of BTS, enters the conversation, the immediate, inescapable mental image is one of pure, unadulterated high fashion, an intensely captivating, almost intimidatingly gorgeous muse who effortlessly commands the absolute full attention of global luxury brands like Celine and Cartier with a single piercing, smoldering gaze that can single-handedly crash entire social media platforms within mere seconds of a photograph being posted. He is the ultimate untouchable enigma, a mesmerizing jazz enthusiast who seamlessly moves with the effortless grace of a classic Hollywood movie star, projecting an aura of overwhelming sophistication, deep mystery, and a slightly aloof coolness that makes him seem as though he exists in an entirely different, highly elevated atmospheric stratosphere from the rest of normal humanity. However, when his mother bravely steps into the spotlight to finally unveil the fiercely guarded, intensely intimate reality of what happens the absolute second this breathtaking global icon returns to the quiet, grounding sanctuary of his family home, the deeply emotional, staggeringly heartwarming, and hilariously chaotic truth she exposes will completely shatter your perception of the untouchable fashion king and leave you utterly, hopelessly endeared to his true, raw nature. To truly, profoundly understand the highly complex, incredibly sensitive psychology of Kim Tae-young, you must actively journey back to his profoundly humble, deeply rustic origin story in the quiet agricultural town of Gurcheong, where he was famously raised for the first 14 years of his life by his beloved grandmother, harboring genuine, simple dreams of becoming a strawberry farmer before fate violently catapulted him onto the world's biggest musical stages. Today, despite literally possessing a net worth that rivals small nations and regularly mingling with the absolute highest echelons of international celebrity elites, his mother emotionally and affectionately confesses that the absolute moment he crosses the threshold of their home, the cool, sophisticated, high-fashion muse named V completely vanishes into thin air, entirely and instantly replaced by a spectacularly clingy, incredibly loud and profoundly sentimental young man who basically reverts to the behavioral patterns of an oversized, desperately affectionate golden retriever puppy who simply cannot bear to be physically separated from his loved ones for even a single second. She hilariously exposes a deeply endearing psychological trait that completely contradicts his independent, aloof public persona. Tae-young suffers from what she jokingly calls an absolute chronic physical touch deficit, meaning that the moment he is home, he fundamentally refuses to respect any concept of personal space, constantly demanding extreme, uninterrupted levels of skinship from his deeply exasperated but overwhelmingly fond parents. His mother laughs until she literally cries as she describes how her multi-millionaire, globally revered superstar son will stubbornly refuse to sleep in his own lavishly decorated massive bedroom, instead actively choosing to drag his pillows into their parents' room in the absolute dead of the night, forcefully wedging himself right in the middle of their bed and tightly wrapping his long limbs around them like a giant clinging koala bear, desperately soaking in the pure, grounding comfort of their physical presence after spending agonizing months isolated in cold, impersonal luxury hotel rooms across the globe. Psychologists and behavioral experts find this intense, overwhelming need for physical proximity profoundly fascinating. For an individual who is constantly surrounded by massive, screaming crowds of millions of people, yet ironically suffers from the deeply isolating, crippling loneliness that inherently accompanies extreme global fame, seeking the literal physical warmth of his parents is not an act of immaturity, but rather a profound, desperate survival mechanism, a subconscious, beautiful way to physically anchor himself back to reality and forcefully remind his soul that he is deeply, unconditionally loved, not for his flawless face or his record-breaking baritone vocals, but simply because he is their son. Furthermore, his mother tearfully and beautifully reveals the staggering depth of his extreme, almost heartbreaking sentimentality, a trait that sharply contrasts with the fast-paced, highly disposable nature of the modern pop industry he dominates. While he could easily afford to furnish their entire home with the most expensive, modern luxury items on the planet, she intimately shares that Tae-young has a deeply chaotic, incredibly stubborn habit of constantly bringing home completely random, heavily worn-out vintage items, obscure antique paintings, and strange broken musical instruments that he discovers in hidden flea markets during his world tours under his photography pseudonym Vanti, vehemently defending these objects as priceless, deeply soulful treasures. He will spend hours passionately and excitedly explaining the imagined, romantic histories behind a slightly chipped teacup, a dusty jazz vinyl, or a completely out-of-tune saxophone to his utterly bewildered family, fully displaying the deeply sensitive, artistic, and incredibly romantic soul that constantly observes the hidden, overlooked beauty in a world that moves way too fast. His mother acutely realizes that this intense love for nostalgia is directly, inextricably linked to the massive permanent void left in his heart by the tragic, untimely passing of his beloved grandmother, a profoundly agonizing loss that he famously broke down over during a massive stadium concert, weeping openly as he confessed how much he desperately wished she could have seen him perform at the absolute peak of his success. Consequently, his mother deeply understands that his chaotic antique collecting and his desperate, clingy affection are his beautiful, heartbreaking ways of fiercely holding on to his roots, actively ensuring that the pure, innocent, and deeply loving farm boy from Gurcheong is never fully swallowed alive by the terrifying, cold machinery of massive global fame. Even his interactions with his younger siblings reveal a fiercely protective, incredibly generous older brother who constantly showers them with unprompted gifts and deeply emotional advice, desperately trying to provide them with the ordinary, peaceful youth that he was forced to sacrifice for his monumental career. When she watches him sitting quietly on the living room floor, wearing his most comfortable faded pajamas, happily humming a classic jazz tune while gently petting their family Pomeranian Yenton with an expression of pure, unadulterated peace on his flawless face, her maternal heart swells with an immense, protective, and overwhelming pride, fundamentally realizing that beneath the blinding camera flashes and the suffocating weight of being the world's most handsome idol, Kim Tae-young has miraculously and beautifully managed to protect the softest, most vulnerable, and incredibly tender parts of his profoundly human soul, leaving us completely awestruck by his unwavering dedication to love, family, and the beautiful, simple magic of ordinary life, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that his greatest and most enduring masterpiece is not his chart-topping solo album, but the beautiful, fiercely guarded authenticity of his own incredibly warm heart. Number 1. Jungkook, the Golden Maknae, the Sleepless Perfectionist. When the name Jeon Jungkook, globally revered and universally crowned as the unparalleled Golden Maknae of BTS, is mentioned, the world immediately envisions a literal pop titan, an incredibly fierce, multi-talented prodigy who effortlessly dominates massive stadium stages, flawlessly executes agonizingly difficult choreography, and casually makes history by performing solo at the FIFA World Cup opening ceremony with the effortless, staggering confidence of a seasoned veteran. He is the ultimate untouchable all-rounder, a man who seemingly possesses the supernatural, superhuman ability to absolutely master any given skill, whether it is professional-level boxing, complex video directing, breathtaking painting, or hitting unimaginable high notes on his very first attempt, radiating a powerful, dominating aura that makes him appear entirely invincible to his millions of fiercely loyal fans across the globe. However, as we finally reach the absolute pinnacle of our explosive countdown, his mother bravely steps forward to unveil a heavily guarded, intensely private reality that completely shatters this effortless prodigy illusion, exposing a deeply emotional, staggeringly intense truth that firmly crowns him as the absolute hardest worker behind closed doors, a revelation that will leave you entirely speechless and profoundly moved by the sheer terrifying magnitude of his dedication. To deeply and truly understand the staggering psychological complexity of Jungkook, you must actively rewind the clock back to his profoundly agonizing, heartbreaking origin story. He was merely a shy, incredibly introverted 15-year-old boy when he completely left the comforting safety of his family home in Busan, moving to the harsh, unforgiving city of Seoul, where he would famously cry himself to sleep in the cramped, freezing trainee dorms, absolutely terrified of the unknown and desperately missing his mother's warm embrace. This immense foundational trauma of growing up entirely under the relentless, blinding scrutiny of the public eye and being essentially raised by his 6 older bandmates created a massive, unspoken psychological burden within his soul. He felt an overwhelming, crushing sense of debt and a terrifying, relentless fear of becoming a burden to the Hyungs who sacrificed everything to protect him. Today, despite having achieved a level of unimaginable global supremacy and possessing a massive multi-million-dollar fortune, his mother tearfully and emotionally confesses that the absolute second this global icon crosses the threshold of their family home, he does not collapse in exhaustion or demand to be pampered like a conquering king. Instead, his home immediately transforms into an intense, relentless 24-hour training facility, completely exposing the dark, heavy price of his golden title. She reveals an incredibly fascinating, deeply exhausting psychological truth that entirely contradicts his natural-born genius image. Jungkook fundamentally does not know how to stop working, operating with an intense, hyperactive physical engine that refuses to shut down, driven by an extreme, chronic perfectionism that physically prevents him from ever truly resting. His mother hilariously but sorrowfully describes the absolute chaos of living with him, noting how she will often wake up at 3 in the morning to the heavy, rhythmic thudding sounds echoing from the living room, only to discover her globally idolized son dripping with sweat, aggressively executing hundreds of intense, punishing push-ups and grueling calisthenics on the hard floor, fiercely maintaining his statuesque physique while the entire world is fast asleep. But the relentless grind does not stop at his physical fitness. She intimately shares that his pursuit of vocal perfection borders on absolute clinical obsession. He will passionately and loudly sing at the absolute top of his lungs while taking a shower, violently vibrating the bathroom walls, and will continuously hum intricate, agonizingly difficult vocal runs while casually walking around the kitchen, using every single waking second of his life to meticulously polish his craft, completely terrified that if he stops practicing for even one day, he will let down the millions of fans who depend on his flawless voice. Even more shockingly, his mother exposes a highly comical, deeply relatable, yet intensely rigid household habit that perfectly encapsulates his obsessive need for ultimate control and absolute perfection. Jungkook is an absolute, uncompromising fanatic when it comes to doing the laundry. While most international superstars have an army of dedicated staff to handle their daily chores, his mother laughs in pure exasperation as she reveals that he absolutely forbids her from touching his clothes, aggressively taking over the washing machine the moment he arrives home. He possesses a highly specific, scientifically calculated, and brutally strict methodology for separating fabrics, meticulously measuring precise ratios of specialized fabric softeners, and obsessively sniffing the wet garments to ensure the scent profile meets his exact, uncompromising standards before delicately hanging them to dry with mathematical precision. Furthermore, his mother intimately shares that his incredible hyperactive brain simply refuses to shut down even when his physical body is utterly exhausted. She will often quietly peek into his childhood room in the early hours of the morning, only to find him intensely hunched over his computer desk, his eyes practically glued to the glowing monitors as he meticulously edits highly complex professional-grade videos for his Golden Closet films, or passionately sketches incredibly detailed, museum-quality digital artwork, relentlessly pouring his absolute soul into entirely new creative mediums just to ensure he is constantly evolving, constantly improving, and never, ever stagnating. This endless pursuit of greatness is deeply tied to a profound, heartbreaking sense of filial piety. His mother emotionally recalls how he used to weep as a young boy, agonizing over the fact that his parents had to work incredibly grueling, exhausting jobs just to support his incredibly expensive dreams, promising them with absolute fierce determination that he would one day buy them everything they ever desired. Now that he has literally given them the world, that deeply ingrained, desperate childhood fear of failure still forcefully drives his every single action, making him firmly believe that the absolute second he stops running, the entire dream might suddenly collapse. Psychologists and behavioral experts deeply understand this hyperfixation on constant self-improvement and mundane chores. For an individual whose entire life is dictated by massive, unpredictable global tour schedules and the chaotic, suffocating pressure of being the center of the world's biggest musical act, establishing absolute, flawless control over simple tasks provides an immense, desperately needed sense of psychological grounding and therapeutic relief. Yet beneath these highly entertaining sitcom-like anecdotes of his midnight workouts and aggressive laundry sessions, his mother harbors a profound, overwhelmingly beautiful maternal pain that frequently brings genuine heavy tears to her eyes. She acutely watches him meticulously fold his shirts with the same intense, burning focus he uses to headline Wembley Stadium, profoundly realizing the heavy, suffocating crown of the Golden Maknae is a title he feels he must bleed to earn every single day of his life. She remembers the terrifying, agonizing moments watching him push his physical body past the absolute brink of human endurance, famously collapsing backstage during massive world tours, gasping for air and requiring emergency oxygen tanks entirely because he fundamentally refuses to give his fans anything less than 1,000% of his soul. Therefore, when she watches him pacing around their quiet home, relentlessly singing and working out, she deeply understands that his extreme, unparalleled work ethic is not driven by vanity or ego, but an incredibly pure, almost heartbreakingly fierce love and a desperate, deeply ingrained survival instinct to constantly prove himself worthy of the immense love he receives. His mother's deeply emotional, incredibly raw confessions completely shatter the illusion of effortless perfection, beautifully painting a masterpiece of a young man who took the intense, agonizing pressure of his youth and actively transformed it into an unbreakable, staggering dedication that puts the entire global music industry to shame. It is this staggering, breathtakingly beautiful duality, the unstoppable, dominating pop god who actively chooses to obsessively do his own laundry and relentlessly practice his vocals in the dead of the night, that makes Jungkook's true nature so incredibly compelling, deeply inspiring, and overwhelmingly heartbreaking, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that his true superpower is not just his natural talent, but his incredibly raw, vulnerable, and profoundly beautiful human heart that beats with an unyielding, fierce devotion, firmly cementing his ultimate legacy as the hardest-working idol in existence, who will always, without fail, push himself to the absolute limits just to see his family and fans smile.